My parents said they've been visiting me at a care facility for months, but I've been living in my own apartment. I opened my apartment door to find my mother and father standing in the hallway with expressions of shock that bordered on horror. My mother's hand flew to her mouth and she made a small gasping sound. My father went pale, his eyes moving from my face to the apartment number on the door and back again. I said, "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here? I thought you were coming next weekend." My mother's voice came out strangled. "Ethan, how are you here? We just visited you this morning at Riverside." I stepped back, confused. Riverside was a care facility across town, the kind of place for people with severe disabilities or chronic conditions. I said, "Visited me where? I've been here all day working from home." My father looked at my mother, then back at me. He said, "Son, we've been visiting you at Riverside Care Center every week since March. You've been a patient there for 4 months." The hallway seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the door frame and said, "That's impossible. I've been living here the entire time. I work remotely for Deltron Systems. I pay rent here." "What are you talking about?" My mother started crying, her hands shaking as she reached toward me. She said, "They told us you'd had a breakdown, that you needed intensive care. We've been paying for your treatment. Ethan, we've sat with you in your room dozens of times." I pulled them inside my apartment, my mind racing. The living room was scattered with my work papers, my laptop open on the coffee table showing the project I'd been coding all afternoon. My coffee cup sat beside it, still half full. I gestured around the space and said, "Does this look like a care facility? I live here. I've lived here for 2 years." My father walked through the apartment as if he was seeing a ghost. He opened my bedroom door, saw my unmade bed and clothes on the floor, and turned back to me with complete bewilderment on his face. My mother sat down heavily on my couch and said, "I don't understand. We've been going to Riverside every Sunday. The staff knows us. We sign in. We go to room 3B. You're there in bed, and we sit with you." The details were too specific to be confusion. I sat down across from her and said, "Describe what I look like when you visit me." She wiped her eyes and said, "You're usually sedated. You don't talk much. The nurses say you have good days and bad days. Sometimes you recognize us, sometimes you don't. They said it's part of your condition." My father's voice was hollow. "We've been paying $8,000 a month for your care. The bills come regularly. We've spoken to your case manager, a woman named Dr. Lydia Frost. She updates us on your progress." I felt cold spreading through my chest. $8,000 a month for 4 months. $32,000 paid for treatment I never received at a facility I'd never been to. I pulled out my phone and said, "I'm calling Riverside right now." My mother nodded urgently. "Yes, call them. Ask for Dr. Frost. She's your primary physician there." I dialed the number for Riverside Care Center, putting it on speaker. A receptionist answered cheerfully. "Riverside Care Center, how may I direct your call?" I said, "I need to speak with Dr. Lydia Frost about a patient named Ethan Reeves." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. The receptionist said, "I'm sorry, we don't have a Dr. Frost on staff here. Are you sure you have the right facility?" My parents exchanged confused glances. My mother said, "That can't be right. We've met with her multiple times." I asked the receptionist, "Can you check if you have a patient named Ethan Reeves?" More typing, then she said, "I'm not showing anyone by that name in our system. When was the admission date?" I said March and gave her my birth date. She checked again and said, "I'm sorry, sir. There's no record of that patient here. Is there anything else I can help you with?" I thanked her and hung up, my hands starting to shake. My father said, "That doesn't make sense. We've been there. We've walked through the doors, signed the visitor log, gone to your room." I stood and paced. "Show me the bills. Show me everything you have related to this." My mother pulled out her phone and scrolled through emails. She turned the screen toward me, showing a detailed invoice from Riverside Care Center dated 3 days ago. The letterhead looked professional, listing services rendered, medication costs, and therapy sessions. The total was $8,000. The address matched Riverside. A phone number was listed. I called it immediately. It rang twice before going to a generic voicemail. "You've reached the medical billing department. Please leave a message." I left a message demanding a call back, then asked my parents, "How do you pay these bills?" My father said, "Automatic withdrawal from our checking account. The bills come every month via email, and the payment processes 2 days later." I asked to see the bank statements. My father pulled up his banking app and showed me 4 withdrawals of $8,000 each, dated regularly over the past 4 months. Each was labeled Riverside Care Center, Patient Services. $32,000 gone. But withdrawn to where? I said, "We need to go to Riverside right now, in person. We need to see what's actually there." My mother stood immediately, grabbing her purse. My father was already heading for the door. I locked my apartment and followed them to their car, my mind spinning through possibilities. Someone was running an elaborate con, but who and why? And if my parents had been visiting someone they thought was me, who had they actually been seeing? The drive to Riverside took 25 minutes. It was a legitimate facility, well-maintained with landscaped grounds and a modern building. We walked through the front doors into a clean lobby with a reception desk. The woman behind the desk smiled at us. My mother said, "We're here to visit our son, Ethan Reeves, in room 3B. The receptionist's smile faltered. She checked her computer and said, "I'm sorry, we don't have anyone by that name registered here." My father's voice rose. "We've been coming here every Sunday for months. We've signed in. We've been to room 3B dozens of times." The receptionist looked alarmed and said, "Sir, I can assure you we have no patient named Ethan Reeves. Room 3B is currently occupied by a 74-year-old woman who's been here for 6 years." My mother made a sound of distress. I asked, "Can we see the visitor log?" My parents would have signed in every week. The receptionist hesitated, then pulled out a large binder. She flipped through pages of sign-in sheets. My parents' names didn't appear anywhere. My father stared at the book and said, "But we signed in." I remember signing my name. The receptionist called over a supervisor, a man in his 50s named Gerald Tompkins. He listened to our explanation with increasing concern. He said, "I think you've been the victims of fraud. Someone has been impersonating our facility and collecting money from you under false pretenses. This is a police matter." Gerald called the police from his office while my parents sat in stunned silence. I paced the small room, my mind racing. Who would do this? Who had access to detailed information about me and my parents? Who could create convincing fake bills, fake emails, fake everything? And most disturbing, who had my parents been visiting, if not me? 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes, Sergeant Neil Carver and Officer Diane Wolfe. Sergeant Carver was a stocky man in his 40s with sharp eyes. He took down our information and asked my parents to describe exactly what they'd been doing over the past 4 months. My mother explained through tears. "We received a call in March from someone claiming to be from Riverside. They said Ethan had been admitted after a mental health crisis and that he'd listed us as emergency contacts. They said he needed intensive care and that we should come visit him." My father continued. "We drove here immediately. When we arrived, there was a man at the front desk who directed us to room 3B. We went upstairs, and Ethan was there in bed. Or we thought it was Ethan." Officer Wolfe asked, "What did the person in the bed look like?" My mother struggled to answer. "He looked like Ethan, but he was sedated. His face was different somehow, and he didn't really talk to us." My father added, "The nurse said he was heavily medicated and might not be responsive. We just sat with him, held his hand, told him we loved him." Sergeant Carver made notes and said, "You were shown someone who resembled your son but wasn't him. This is a sophisticated fraud operation. Someone went to great lengths to create a believable scenario." He turned to me and asked, "Mr. Reeves, do you have any idea who might benefit from this scheme? Who would have access to your personal information and your parents' contact details?" I thought hard. "My brother David. He's the only one who'd have all that information." My parents went rigid. My mother said, "David wouldn't do this." But her voice lacked conviction. My father's face darkened. He said, "David's been having financial problems. He asked us for a loan 2 months ago, and we said no because we were paying for your care." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. David had created this entire scheme to extract money from our parents. He'd been collecting $8,000 a month while convincing them they were paying for my non-existent medical care. Sergeant Carver asked for David's contact information and address. My father provided it reluctantly. The sergeant said, "We'll need to investigate this thoroughly. Can you forward all the emails and invoices you received? We'll need to trace the money and determine who's behind this." My mother pulled out her phone with shaking hands and began forwarding emails to the address Carver provided. There were dozens of them, all appearing to come from Riverside Care Center, all detailing my supposed condition and treatment. Officer Wolf asked, "How did you communicate with your son during these 4 months? Did you try calling or texting him?" My parents exchanged guilty looks. My mother said, "We were told you couldn't have your phone, that it was too stimulating for your condition. Dr. Frost said family visits were better for your recovery than phone calls." My father added, "Whenever we tried to call you, David would say you were having a bad day, or that the facility had asked us not to contact you directly." I felt anger building. David had isolated me from our parents while he bled them for money. I asked, "Did you ever think it was strange that I never called you? That you couldn't talk to me?" My mother started crying harder. "We thought you were too ill. We thought you couldn't help it. The doctor made it sound like you were barely functioning." The manipulation had been total and calculated. Sergeant Carver said, "We need to locate David Reeves immediately. Mr. and Mrs. Reeves, can you try calling him now?" My father dialed David's number. It rang several times before going to voicemail. He tried twice more with the same result. The sergeant said, "We'll send officers to his last known address. In the meantime, I need you all to come to the station to give formal statements. This is fraud, identity theft, and possibly extortion. We're talking about serious felony charges." At the police station, I gave a detailed statement about my life over the past 4 months. I showed them my work emails proving I'd been employed and functioning normally. I provided my lease agreement, utility bills, and bank statements showing I'd been living independently and managing my own affairs. My parents gave statements about every visit they'd made to the fake facility, every conversation they'd had with the fake doctor, and every dollar they'd transferred. By the time we finished, it was evening. Sergeant Carver said, "Officers went to David's apartment. He wasn't there, and neighbors say they haven't seen him in several days. We've issued a warrant for his arrest and flagged his credit cards and accounts. We'll find him." My mother looked broken. She said, "How could he do this to us? To you? His own brother?" I had no answer for her. The betrayal went beyond money. David had let our parents believe their son was sick and suffering. He'd let them pour their emotional energy into visiting someone they thought was me in crisis. He'd stolen months of their lives and peace of mind. My father sat with his head in his hands. He said, "We paid him $32,000 to torture us with worry and guilt. And you, Ethan, you must have thought we'd abandoned you. You must have wondered why we never called." I admitted, "I did wonder. You usually call weekly, but I thought you were busy. I figured I'd see you eventually." The hurt in their eyes was devastating. We left the station near midnight. My parents wanted me to come stay with them, but I needed space to process everything. I drove back to my apartment alone, my mind churning. Once inside, I tried to remember the last time I'd seen David in person. It had been at Christmas, 5 months ago. He'd seemed stressed, distracted. He'd mentioned having trouble at work, some project that fell through. I'd offered to help him with his resume, but he'd brushed me off. Had he been planning this even then? I barely slept that night. In the morning, I called my employer and explained I needed a few days to deal with a family emergency. My supervisor was understanding and told me to take whatever time I needed. Then I started digging into David's life, searching for clues about where he might be. I checked his social media accounts, which hadn't been updated in weeks. I called his workplace and was told he'd resigned in March, right around the time the fake facility scheme started. I called his friends, but none had heard from him recently. David had vanished, taking my parents' money with him. Over the next 3 days, the police investigation expanded. Detectives traced the fake emails to an IP address registered to a mail forwarding service. The phone number used for the fake facility was a burner phone that had been deactivated. The bank account receiving my parents' payments was set up under a shell company that listed David as the sole officer. The evidence was overwhelming, but David remained missing. On the 4th day, Sergeant Carver called with an update. "We've located David. He was arrested in Nevada trying to cross into Arizona. He had $28,000 in cash and a fake ID." Relief and anger hit me simultaneously. I asked, "What happens now?" Carver said, "He's being extradited back here. He'll be charged with fraud, identity theft, theft by deception, and several other counts." The district attorney is treating this as a serious case given the sophistication of the scheme and the amount stolen. He's looking at significant prison time. I thanked him and immediately called my parents. My father answered, his voice thick with emotion. They found him. I said, I know. The sergeant just called me. My mother got on the line. She asked, did he say anything? Did he explain why? I said, not that I've heard, but we'll get answers at his arraignment. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. My parents and I attended together, sitting in the courtroom waiting for David to be brought in. When he finally appeared in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, he looked gaunt and tired. His eyes met mine for a brief second before he looked away. The judge read the charges, a long list of felonies that carried a combined maximum sentence of 30 years. David's public defender requested bail, but the prosecutor argued he was a flight risk given his attempted escape to Arizona. The judge agreed and denied bail. After the hearing, the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Angela Rourke, met with us. She explained that David had given a partial confession to secure a potentially reduced sentence. He admitted to creating the fake facility scheme, but claimed he'd been desperate for money after losing his job and racking up gambling debts. Angela said, he owes $45,000 to various casinos and loan sharks. He thought he could borrow from your parents temporarily and pay them back before they figured it out. My father's voice was cold. Borrow? He stole. And he traumatized us in the process. We thought our son was dying in a care facility. Angela nodded sympathetically. That's why we're pursuing the maximum charges. This wasn't a simple theft. He caused severe emotional distress through prolonged deception. The fake medical crisis, the fake facility visits, the impersonation, it all adds up to a cruel and calculated crime. My mother asked, who was the person we were visiting? Who did we think was Ethan? Angela consulted her notes. According to David's statement, he paid a man named Leo Finch $500 per visit to impersonate you. Finch would take sedatives beforehand to appear ill and unresponsive. We're looking for Finch now as an accomplice. The idea that some stranger had been lying in bed pretending to be me, while my parents held his hand and cried over him, made my stomach turn. The violation was complete. The trial was set for 3 months out, but David's attorney approached Angela with a plea deal. David would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a recommended sentence of 12 years instead of the maximum 30. He'd also agree to repay the $32,000 plus interest and court costs. Angela presented the deal to us. She said, a trial would be long and painful. You'd have to testify in detail about the emotional trauma. A plea deal guarantees a conviction and gets you restitution faster. My parents looked at me. My mother said, what do you think? I thought about sitting in a courtroom while David's lawyer tried to make excuses for what he'd done. I thought about my parents having to relive every fake visit, every moment of anguish thinking I was suffering. I said, if he admits what he did publicly and allocates at sentencing, I think we should take the deal. My father agreed. I want him held accountable, but I don't want to drag this out for months. We told Angela to accept the plea. A week later, David stood before a judge and formally pleaded guilty to 6 felony counts, including wire fraud, identity theft, and theft by deception. The judge scheduled sentencing for a month later and remanded David to custody until then. The court also issued an order for David to provide a full accounting of the stolen money and to begin making restitution payments immediately upon release from prison. The sentencing hearing was packed with family members, including aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd heard about the case. David was brought in wearing a suit, his public defender beside him. The judge asked if anyone wanted to make victim impact statements before sentencing. My father stood first. His voice shook as he spoke. Your Honor, my son David stole our money. But more than that, he stole 4 months of our peace of mind. My wife and I believed our other son, Ethan, was in a care facility dying of a mental illness. We visited a stranger who we thought was Ethan, and we mourned what we thought we were losing. David knew we were suffering, and he let it continue because it was profitable for him. He didn't just commit fraud, he committed emotional torture against his own parents. My mother spoke next, tears streaming down her face. I held another man's hand, thinking it was my son. I told him I loved him and begged him to get better. I cried every night worrying about whether Ethan would survive. David watched us go through this, and he didn't care. He cashed our checks and let us drown in grief. I don't know if I can ever forgive him for that. Then it was my turn. I stood and faced David directly. You didn't just steal from our parents. You tried to steal my identity, my reputation, my relationship with them. You let them think I was mentally ill and needed constant care. You isolated me from them and them from me. You damaged our family in ways money can't fix. I want you to understand that what you did was cruel and unforgivable. The judge listened to all of us, then turned to David. Mr. Reeves, do you have anything to say before I impose sentence? David stood, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I was desperate and I made terrible choices. I never meant to hurt anyone. I thought I could fix everything before anyone knew. The judge's expression was stern. Mr. Reeves, your actions weren't the result of desperation. They were the result of deliberate planning and cruel manipulation. You created an elaborate scheme that caused profound emotional harm to your family. You preyed on your parents' love and concern for their son. This court finds your actions particularly reprehensible, given the level of betrayal involved. She sentenced him to 12 years in state prison as recommended by the plea deal, with credit for time served. She ordered restitution of $32,000 plus $8,000 in court costs and interest to be paid according to a schedule determined by the probation department. She also ordered David to have no contact with any of us for the duration of his sentence and 5 years of parole afterward. As David was led away, he looked back at us one last time. The expression on his face was hard to read. Regret? Resentment? I didn't care anymore. He'd destroyed any remaining bond between us. In the months after the sentencing, my parents and I worked on rebuilding our relationship. They apologized repeatedly for believing the fake facility story, for not trying harder to contact me directly, for letting someone manipulate them so completely. I told them it wasn't their fault, that David had exploited their love and trust in the most cynical way possible. We started having weekly dinners again, and slowly the wounds began to heal. My mother went to therapy to process the trauma of believing her son was dying while being deceived by her other son. My father threw himself into researching elder fraud and scam prevention, channeling his anger into protecting other families from similar schemes. I focused on my work and tried to move forward, though I occasionally had nightmares about waking up in a care facility, trapped and unable to prove who I was. The fear that David's fake reality could have become real if circumstances had been different haunted me. A year after David's sentencing, my parents received their first restitution check, a payment of $200 from David's prison work earnings. It would take decades at that rate to repay what he'd stolen, but the symbolic acknowledgement mattered. My father framed the check instead of cashing it, hanging it in his home office as a reminder of what they'd survived. I eventually started dating again, something I'd avoided during the aftermath of David's arrest. I met a woman named Olivia at a work conference, and we built a relationship based on honesty and transparency. When I told her about David and the fake facility scheme, she listened without judgment and said, "Your brother didn't just betray you and your parents. He betrayed the concept of family itself." Her understanding meant everything. 2 years after the trial, my parents sold their house and moved to a smaller place in a retirement community. They said they wanted a fresh start, somewhere without the memories of receiving those fake bills and believing their son was dying in a care facility across town. I helped them move, packing up boxes and furniture, and in one of my father's desk drawers, I found the visitor log David had created. It was a fake document with my parents' signatures forged across multiple pages, evidence of visits that never happened to a facility that never held me. My father saw me holding it and said, "Burn it. I don't want any reminder of that time." We built a fire in the backyard and watched the pages turn to ash, the lies literally going up in smoke. As the flames consumed the last evidence of David's deception, my mother said, "He's already served 2 years, 10 more to go." I realized that while David sat in prison, we'd been rebuilding what he'd tried to destroy, and that was its own kind of justice. 3 years after David's conviction, I received a letter from him forwarded through his prison counselor. The counselor had included a note saying David had been in intensive therapy and wanted to communicate with family if we were open to it. I stared at the envelope for days before opening it. The letter was 3 pages of apologies, explanations, and requests for understanding. David wrote about his gambling addiction, his financial desperation, his shame at asking for help. He wrote about the moment he'd conceived the fake facility plan and how it had snowballed beyond his control. He wrote about the guilt that consumed him daily in prison. He ended by saying he understood if we never forgave him, but he wanted us to know he'd changed and was trying to become someone worthy of forgiveness. I showed the letter to my parents. My mother read it and set it down without comment. My father said, "Does he think words fix what he did? Does he think therapy erases the damage?" I didn't have answers. I wrote back a brief response saying I appreciated his honesty, but wasn't ready for ongoing contact. I explained that trust, once destroyed so completely, couldn't be rebuilt through letters. I said maybe someday, but not now. My father never responded to David's letter. My mother eventually wrote a short note saying she hoped he found peace, but that she needed more time before she could engage with him. David sent one more letter months later, acknowledging our boundaries and saying he'd wait as long as needed. 4 years in, my parents' restitution fund had grown to $4,200 from David's prison earnings and a settlement with the mail forwarding service that had enabled his scheme. It was nowhere near the $32,000 stolen, but my parents said they didn't care about the money anymore. My father said, "We got something more valuable back. We got you, truly got you back, not some fake version in a bed. We got our family, even if it's smaller now." My mother agreed. David can keep his money. We kept our son. Their perspective helped me let go of my own anger. I realized I'd spent years letting David's betrayal occupy mental space he didn't deserve. I started focusing on building my own life, my career, my relationship with Olivia, my friendships. I visited my parents regularly, and we created new traditions that had nothing to do with the past. We never talked about the fake facility anymore unless someone brought it up, and even then we spoke about it factually, without emotion, as something that happened to us but didn't define us. 5 years after David's conviction, he became eligible for parole. My parents and I submitted letters to the parole board detailing the impact of his crimes and requesting he serve his full sentence. We attended the hearing via video conference and listened as David's attorney argued for his early release based on good behavior and completed rehabilitation programs. The parole board asked David about his plans if released, and he outlined a proposal to work in addiction counseling and continue restitution payments. The parole board deliberated and denied his release, citing the severity of the original crime and the need for continued accountability. David would be eligible for another parole hearing in 2 years. My parents seemed relieved, but I felt nothing. David's incarceration or release no longer affected my daily life. He'd become a closed chapter, someone I'd once known who'd made catastrophic choices and was living with the consequences. Olivia and I got engaged that year, and when I told my parents, they cried with joy. My mother said, "After everything David put us through, I worried we'd never have happy family moments again. But look at us. We survived. We're celebrating." The wedding was small and intimate, with my parents walking me down the aisle together and giving a toast about resilience and chosen family. We deliberately didn't invite anyone from David's side of the extended family who'd defended him or minimized what he'd done. It was our day, our celebration of moving forward. 7 years after David's sentencing, he was finally granted parole. My parents received notification that he'd be released to a halfway house and required to continue payments according to the restitution schedule. None of us planned to contact him or allow contact with us. The protective order remained in effect for another 3 years of his parole term. I heard through a distant cousin that David was working at a warehouse and attending mandated therapy. The cousin said David asked about us and seemed genuinely remorseful. I didn't respond to this information. Remorse didn't undo what he'd done. 10 years after that surreal day when my parents appeared at my apartment claiming they'd been visiting me at a care facility, I sat in my home office working on a project for my now senior position at Deltron Systems. Olivia was in the kitchen making dinner, and our 2-year-old daughter was playing with blocks in the living room. My parents were coming for dinner, their weekly tradition with us. The doorbell rang and I went to answer it, finding my parents on the doorstep with a gift bag and smiles. My mother hugged me and said, "We're so glad you're here, really here, always here." I knew what she meant. She'd never fully shaken the trauma of those fake visits, the memory of believing I was dying in a facility while I lived my life unaware. My father joined the hug, and for a moment we stood in the doorway, three people who'd survived something designed to destroy them. David had tried to steal money, identity, and family bonds. He'd succeeded temporarily with the money and caused permanent scars, but he hadn't broken us. We'd rebuilt what he damaged and created something stronger. That was the justice that mattered most. Not the years he'd served or the money he still owed, but the fact that we'd refused to let his betrayal define us. We went inside together, and the evening unfolded in laughter, food, and stories. My daughter climbed into my mother's lap and asked about pictures on the wall. My father played with her blocks, building towers for her to knock down. Olivia and I watched our family together, whole and real and present. That was what David could never take away, no matter how elaborate his lies had been. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.